The Poet's Dog by Patricia McLaughlin. Part 2. Chapter 5. Full of sorrow, full of joy. There was no silence in the cabin, even at night. The wind was like a wild song that pushed away the quiet. The power had gone off and on many times. We cooked up many things from the freezer to be heated in the fireplace later. We stored the cooked food in coolers outside in the snow. Today Flora cooked soup on the stove, stirring as she read a book. "This is you, Teddy," she called to me. When I walked over to the stove, I saw she was reading a book on Irish wolfhound dogs. A tall dog like me was on the cover. "You're much better looking, I must say," said Flora. "If I could smile, I would have." "Did you know that your ancestors were warriors?" she said, peering over the book at me. "So Sullivan told me," I said. "Your great-grandfather or great-grandmother may have pulled soldiers off horses with their teeth," said Flora. "I myself have never done that," I said, making Nickel laugh. "It says here you have a kindly disposition," said Flora. "Does it say he's a best friend?" asked Nickel, tossing more wood on the fire. Flora lowered the book and stirred the soup, tossing in some herbs from a small jar. "Yes," she announced, "it does, and often the Irish wolfhound loves children and cats." "We have a cat at home," said Flora. "Is it a spitter?" I asked. Flora gave me an insulted look. A sudden sweep of wind sent snow against the cabin. Outside, a limb fell. We all looked up. "This is lasting a long time," said Nickel. "The batteries for the weather box are getting low, and I don't know how to charge them. But the storm is expected to last for a few more days." "Good," said Flora. "I like it." "I like it here too," said Nickel, "as long as there's wood to burn and food to eat." He paused. "And as long as Mom and Dad aren't worried." "Remember, I wrote a note," said Flora. "There's wood in the shed," I said. "If we can get there," said Nickel. "And food in the pantry," said Flora. "I like it here too," I said suddenly. "I do." Sylvan types on his computer, sometimes smiling, sometimes frowning and muttering to himself. I sit up on the red rug and yawn my yawn that ends with a squeak. He looks over at me. Being a writer is not easy, you know. It is, now that I think of it, either full of sorrow or full of joy. Like being a dog, I say. Sylvan turns in his chair and peers at me. I should take my own advice to Ellie and write about what I love. Sylvan pauses. "I will write about you." "The way Ellie wrote about her cat?" I ask. "Yes," said Sylvan. He turns back to his computer and writes furiously. "Ellie is a poet, you know," he says, at long last. The peal of laughter from Sylvan fills the room. After a moment, he laughs more at what he's writing. He coughs a bit at the same time. He has a bottle of medicine and a spoon on his desk. He pours some into the spoon. His cheeks are a little flushed. After a few minutes, he gets up, closes the cover on his computer, and lies down. The cough stays with him through the night. It is the beginning of Sylvan getting sick. Chapter 6. Something Good. Day 3 in the cabin during a horrific storm. Nickel read dramatically from his notebook. Flora is rummaging through the refrigerator like a hungry weasel, searching for something mysterious and possibly poisonous. Nickel wrote silently in his notebook every day and had just begun reading his views of our life in the cabin. His writing is funny, sly, and sometimes poignant. Sylvan had taught me the word poignant. It may be the most important thing in poetry, Sylvan tells me, poignancy. Sylvan would have said that Nickel had style. Not once had Nickel asked to use Sylvan's computer. The silver computer sat silently on his desk, cover closed. There was something final about that. Sylvan closes his laptop computer with a snap. The end. Dunno. The loud word dunno causes me to leap up from a sound sleep. Sylvan grins at me and brings a pillow over to my red rug. He lies next to me, one arm around me. Because I am a dog with a good nose and fine ears, I can hear that he is not breathing easily. He doesn't have the same Sylvan smell that I know. "You should go to the vet," I tell him. "The doctor," he corrects me. "Yes. Ellie is driving me to the doctor tomorrow. You can have a nice talk with her." His grin is huge. Flora had become the cook, inventing meals that looked terrible but surprised us by tasting good. I lap up her soups noisily, the liquid first, then eating whatever she has added at the end. "That's a much better way to eat soup than with a spoon," said Nickel. "Peanut butter is very hard," I told him, trying to get it off the roof of my mouth. "It's not because I'm a girl that I cook," Flora explained. "I like it. It's in the herbs. Like science. When I grow up and have 27 cats and dogs and become a horse trainer, I will have a large collection of herbs." Nickel laughed, the cheerful sound cutting through the constant noise of the wind outside. It reminded me of Sylvan's laugh. "I will find a horse. You just watch," said Flora, turning on the oven. And she will, said Nickel. Nickel and I went outside to the shed while Flora cooked whatever invention she cooked. It was still hard to get through the wind and drifts. We both ran with our heads down. When we reached the shed, we opened the door and shut it behind us. The shed smelled the sweet smell of cut wood. It was strangely warm and quiet. Nickel leaned against the woodpile for a moment. "This is where you slept after Sylvan left," he said, nodding at the pile of gray blankets behind the woodpile. "Yes. You didn't want to sleep in the house alone." "No. Were you warm enough?" "Most nights." Nickel sighed. "But what will happen to you after Flora and I go home?" I didn't answer. After a moment, Nickel started loading wood into the log carrier. Just before we opened the door to fight our way back to the cabin, Nickel turned. "Something good will happen." "I know. After all, you once had Sylvan," he said. He said it with a poignant tone. That word again. Poignant. When we were out in the snow and wind again, walking quickly, Nickel suddenly touched my head. "Look!" In the clearing close to the woods stood a deer, the color of dawn, watching us. "A sign of something good," said Nickel. We hurried on, and when we both looked back, the deer was gone. Chapter 7. Going Away. I told them in the morning. I didn't want to tell them at night. Night could bring dreams. We were eating pancakes that Flora had made without milk, strange and grainy and wonderful, with lots of maple syrup. I licked the syrup off first, then ate the pancakes in small bits. Nickel watched me and ate his pancake the same way. It made Flora laugh. Nickel had found the cord to charge the weather box. More days of bad weather. Ice is possible before the storm ends. The roads will be cleared after 2 days. Things will open again. Electricity will be back on in most places. "So," I said suddenly, "Sylvan got very sick." I hadn't meant to say it right out like that. Nickel put down his fork. Flora opened her mouth, but for the first time since I'd known her, no words came out. "You didn't think he'd just gone away and left me, did you?" I asked. "After all I've told you about him?" Flora shook her head, still silent. I could see tears at the edges of Nickel's face. "That's the story," I said. "He got sick." Ellie comes to drive Sylvan to the doctor. The day is sunny, and she walks into the house without knocking. "Hello, Teddy," she says. She puts her head down next to mine and hugs me. "Hello, Ellie," I say. She grins. "I can hear you," she says happily. "You're a poet," I say. Sylvan comes into the living room dressed in a tweed jacket over a blue shirt. His eyes are as blue as the shirt. "Did I hear you two talking?" he asked slyly. "Yes," says Ellie. "I'm wondering if my dog, Billy, will talk to me when I get home." "No," says Sylvan. "But don't worry, you'll have many hours to read to him." Ellie sighs. "No, Billy is more of a sleeper," she says. "I'll drive," says Sylvan, who since I've known him has only ridden a bike. Ellie is no fool. "Do you have a driver's license?" she asks. "No, he's a poet," I say, making Ellie laugh. "I'm driving," says Ellie. "You can sit next to me and roll out your lovely words." Ellie strokes my head. "Do you want to ride in the car with us?" she asks me. "I'll wait here," I say. I don't want to leave the house. I'm afraid that if I leave, somehow everything may change. I walk outside and watch them drive off in Ellie's small red car. Going away. Chapter 8. Curmudgeon. I hear Ellie's car drive up to the front door. Sylvan told me about the theater once. I feel like I'm watching a stage play. Sylvan comes in looking tired. He takes off his tweed jacket and stretches out on the couch. "That doctor's office made me sick," complains Sylvan. "There must be an ocean of germs there. That's why I don't like going to the doctor." "You went there sick," says Ellie. She takes bottles of medicine out of the paper bag and sets them by the sink. She sits on a stool next to Sylvan. "He wouldn't let me know what the doctor said," Ellie says to me. "You are not my mother," says Sylvan, his arm covering his eyes. "You are much more beautiful than my mother." "Thank you," says Ellie. "He has a fever," I say. Sylvan takes his arm away from his eyes and stares at me. "How do you know that?" "I'm a dog. I smell the fever, and I can hear chest rumbles in you." "See," says Sylvan with more energy. "I don't need a doctor. I have a dog." "Take your pills and drink lots of water," says Ellie. "I don't much like water," says Sylvan. Ellie laughs a lot. "I'll be back tomorrow for the class if you're well enough to have it here," she says. "Only if someone reads a real poem," says Sylvan. "Curmudgeon," whispers Ellie as she kisses me on the top of my head. "Rest," she calls as she goes out the door. Sylvan doesn't rest. He smiles at me as he sits at the computer. "I like that girl," he says. "I heard her call me a curmudgeon," he adds as he types. "I guess there's nothing wrong with your ears," I say. "Thank you, Dr. Dog." "And you took care of Sylvan," said Nickel. "I did. Like he took care of you, said Flora. Nickel's voice was soft, but I could hear him even with the storm outside. It's almost as if Sylvan saved you and brought you here so you could save us. Maybe. One night late, Sylvan read me part of a poem he had written about me. He called it He the Poet's Dog. I closed my eyes to remember it. He, the poet's dog, picked up my dropped words. He carries them in his soft mouth like treasures to bury for later. So, he, the poet's dog, can pass them along, and I can follow. Flora put her hand on my neck. All this time I've been mad that Sylvan left you, but maybe he didn't really leave at all. At all, she repeated softly. Chapter 9, Memories. It was an evening with no power, a fireplace, fire, oil lamps, a candle on the table. Nickel wrote in his notebook. The room was warm, but Flora sat with a blanket around her shoulders. She had a faraway look. What are you thinking about? I asked her. My youth, she said. Nickel grinned. Like now? He asked. Flora shook her head. I feel different. You are different, I said. You've been brave. You wrote a note and left it for your mother. You kept us on good food for nearly 5 days. I thought of Sylvan's students, romping through life like puppies, young people trying to write their way into adulthood. Do you remember when I was born? Flora asked Nickel. I do. I wanted a guinea pig. Do you remember when you were young? Flora asks me. I'm not sure my memories are like yours. I remember Sullivan most because he gave me words for my memories. Before that I remember moments, but I had no words for them. Flora lifted her shoulders and sighed. I think I feel different because I have worries. I never had worries before now. What are you worried about? Asked Nickel. Not what. Who? Said Flora. Who? I asked. Flora stared at me. You, she said. Nickel looked up from his writing, waiting to hear what I'd say. I worried about me too, but I didn't want to tell them that. I have Ellie, I said. Don't worry. Ellie visits every day. Sometimes she brings food for dinner. For a while, Sylvan seems better. He writes every day. He reads to me every day. When Sylvan forgets to take his medicine, I shake the bottles in my mouth so he remembers. The poets arrive for class, and the boy who tried to write Oxcart Man in his own words reads a poem Sylvan loves. It's called The Crazy Cows of Spring. The cows are crazy with spring, breaking through the fence, galloping to town, leaving their cow pies behind. Flora and Nickel seem comforted by the idea of Ellie taking care of me every day. She can't get here because of the storm, I told them, but she knows that I can get in the house and find my open bag of dog food in the bottom pantry bin. I paused. Sylvan taught me that. It was bedtime, and we laid down blankets and pillows on the red rug. And when you're back home, Ellie will drive me to visit you in her little red car. Let's have a party tomorrow to celebrate, said Flora. I found a can of frosting in the pantry. A party. We turned off the oil lamps and blew out the candle. We could hear ice pellets hitting the windows and roof. The three of us slept in a heap in front of the fire all night together.